Drinks Trolley is
there
back.
it is.
David Jacobs Drinks Trolley is here. What are we drinking tonight?
Well, it's Halloween, so I quite like the idea of a spiced or a mulled cider. It'd be quite a nice Halloween drink.
Okay, let's go for one of those. Carrie sends in tonight's confession. Thank you, Carrie. You get the smart speaker. Well, Simon, my confession goes back to the night of Halloween 40 years ago, 1982. In my defence, Father Simon, you have to know that I have always, as long as I can remember, been not just a little bit frightened, but absolutely petrified of the dark. Darkness in my mind is filled with ghosts, ghoulies, and figures akin to Freddy Krueger and scenes from Thriller. Well into my 40s, if my husband was away, I would always look under all the beds in our house, in the wardrobes, behind every curtain before going to bed, and always slept with the light on. I had an invitation to go to a very special night out in York with a chap who spent his weekend and holidays reenacting battles from the Civil War. It was a special occasion in a beautiful grand old 16th century building. I spent almost a week's wages on hiring an authentic costume to match the meticulous turnout of fellow guests. As we both lived in a town on the south coast of England, I agreed to meet Sebastian as a fairly local location that we could drive up together. We agreed to meet on the Friday afternoon in the workshop of one of Sebastian's friends, who is called Merlin. He is a real-life druid, and when he wasn't being a druid, he was a traditional blacksmith whose main work was for the City Museum in southern England, making and repairing suits of armour and other such artefacts. Now, Merlin's workshop was on a small industrial estate just on the outskirts of the city. During the day, the workshop and the estate were pleasant enough, not at all scary. Been there a few times, and so quite happily drove up, parked the car, passed a few pleasantries with Merlin, whilst Sherlock loaded up the car with our collective belongings. The weekend was looking good. The banquet in York was a grand affair and full of people swanning around in immaculately authentic garb. They even spoke in the language of the day, bidding each other with hails and bowing and nodding and taking it all very seriously. Just your cup of tea, man. It was a story in its own right, but not for today. On the Sunday, however, Sebastian informed me that he had some business in London and would be driving down there instead of going back to where we met. There was no alternative but for me to catch the train back to the small but very ancient city where I came from. The clocks had just gone back, so it was darker much earlier. And on that Sunday evening, the train did not arrive back until 9 p.m., at which point it was very dark, and being a Sunday evening, not many people around. I got off the train, walked out of the station and started heading towards the industrial estate to where my car was parked outside the workshop. As I left the city centre and headed down the country lane, I started to feel a sense of unease. This particular feeling escalated when the sparse street lights stopped altogether. With absolutely nobody around, the whole area started to take on a very sinister and ominous look. My imagination sprung from its slumber and threw in some echoing footsteps and shadowy figures. I was doomed. My steps quickened as the last vestiges of light behind me faded. My heart started to race and my breath quickened as I made my way towards the isolated industrial estate marked by a couple of faint lights. I should add here, Father Simon, and the Holy Collective, that the industrial estate not only was home to Merlin's workshop, but had a storage unit full of artefacts from the museum that were not currently on display. Suits of armour, ancient clothing, stuffed dogs, that kind of thing. By the time I got, they liked that in the old days. By the time I got to the gate, to the industrial estate, I was a total nervous wreck. In my hurry to get to the car, my place of refuge, I put my overnight bag down by the gate, climbed over it in a sprightly heave, and hot-footed it to my car, which was about another 100 yards away by the workshop. I fumbled for my keys, expecting a ghostly bony hand on my shoulder at any second, unlocked the car and fell in. I fired the engine, turned all the lights on, and drove at a rate of knots towards the gate to outgun the ghostly and terrifying figures I knew were there. By this time, I'd worked myself up into a state of absolute and utter panic. I got to the gate and realised with utmost despair that it was padlocked. Father Simon and fellow confessors, I can't describe the sheer terror I was feeling at this point. I jumped out of the car, still convinced that all sorts of ghoulish and demonic figures were all around me, and pulled at the hinges of the gate. Fired by fear and adrenaline, I lifted the gate clear off its hinges and pulled it aside. I drove through and didn't stop to look back until an hour later when I arrived at my parents' house. What a relief I felt as I fell into the house and into the warmth of my family's cosy Sunday evening at home, just as they were making moves to hit the hay. As I was explaining to my mother the horrors of my last couple of hours, I realised with dismay that I had left my bag containing the hired costume by the gate. The thought of going back had me in tears, and then my dear and wonderful mother offered to drive me there to fetch it. Without further ado, we piled into the car, and without any complaint, she drove all the way back to the small but ancient city, where I retrieved my bag from the dislodged gate and back again. Father Simon and Collective, when I spoke with Sebastian the following weekend, he asked me how I'd got my car out of the industrial estate. He said that Merlin had arrived at work on the Monday morning to a ripple of excitement and intrigue over the mystery of the unhinged gate. It had taken 4 beefy men to replace the gate, and the assumption was a gang of youths or would-be thieves had tried to break in with ill intent, but there would be no damage, so perhaps they'd been scared off. In any case, the mystery was the focus of conversation across the whole estate and has never to this day been solved. And so, Father Simon and esteemed confessors, it is from the 4 beefy men that had to go to considerable effort to replace the gate, and the people who wasted many hours possibly on working out how it happened, that I seek forgiveness. I also ask for forgiveness from my wonderful mother, now 93, who drove 2 hours at night just as she was about to go to bed, rather than see me going back all alone and frightened. Lastly, I asked for forgiveness from my boyfriend at the time, Sebastian, for blatantly lying to him just to spend a weekend with another chap, albeit platonically, to see what reenactment people did for fun. Well, you know, there's a very interesting story there being told by Carrie. Anyway, Sebastian, what kind of a cad is he? Oh, I've got to go on some business. I'm ever so sorry, can't take you back. Sister Susie from the saloon bar.
Yeah, I don't forgive Sebastian for that. I too, like Carrie, am terrified of anything scary. So yeah, when it's dark and I'm walking down the street, in my own head, I make up stories of ghosts and ghouls that are following me. I absolutely hate it. So I am completely on her side. I can't believe she lifted the gate though. Four beefy men had to put it back on. But I forgive her. I think fair enough, I would have done the same.
Well, they always say if you're fired by adrenaline, you can do extraordinary things. And clearly, Carrie did an incredible thing. If it's 4 beefy men against her to lift the gate, what do you say, brother?
Well, I'm absolutely in Carrie's corner on this. It's incredible Hulk stuff, isn't it? It's being able to rip the gate off its hinges. And as you say, you know, took 4 beefy men. What they should have done is waited till it got dark and then said to Carrie, right, Carrie, there's things waiting for you unless you can get that gate back on its hinges. So yes, I'm going to forgive. Well done, Carrie.
But also, Sebastian, whoever you are,
yes,
if you've gone up together, then you go back together,
and you do not just
swan off with Merlin.
And probably knew that the industrial estate was going to be closed.
Exactly right. Anyway.